to ILTV's Insider. I'm Aaron Porras, and today we are hoping to tackle a topic that has consistently weighed on the Israeli public: the separation of church, or more accurately, synagogue and state. Joining us to discuss is columnist for Newsweek and editor of HistoryCentral.com, Mark Schulman, and Jeremy Saltan, political strategist and director of English operations with the Yamina Party. Now, those visiting the Jewish state of Israel for the first time might be surprised to note just how seriously the state takes its moniker. For decades, Israelis of all faiths, or lack thereof, caught in a delicate balance between citizens' rights and maintaining the country's religious Jewish identity. But what does that balance look like today, and is that balance fair? So first of all, I'm actually going to turn to you, Jeremy. Now, let's start with the observation of the Sabbath on Friday and Saturday, starting with businesses being open, because currently, select few cities either turn a blind eye to operations over the weekend, or they allow it, but even fewer so. And at any moment, really, if the government were to impose their will, that could come to an abrupt end. Why is it such an issue to allow businesses to stay open during the Sabbath?
Well, you know, this is a country that has all types of people. Of course, there are secular people and there are religious people. Historically,
there are also non-Jewish people.
There are, of course, non-Jewish people, and I'm sure we'll talk about that because besides the separation of synagogue and state, there's also the issue that there's the connection of mosque and state and church and state. You have the Sharia courts here, but I'm sure we'll get to that a little bit later. In terms of the makeup, though, that you have here is you have a very dynamic population of many different kinds. Historically, the reason why we have the situation we're living in now is because David Ben-Gurion needed the support of religious people to establish the state. He was trying to go ahead and get as many Jews as possible behind the idea. So he went ahead and he made a series of, from his perspective, compromises towards the religious community for them to be able to be willing to agree to allow him to establish a state in one that they would like to take part in. Now, of course, that was 1948. We're in 2020. We're living in very different times. But I think it's important to understand that historic context in terms of how we got to where we are now. And of course, I do believe that we need to see...
today, then?
For sure. Today, we do need to see a change. We do need to see reforms. What made sense in 1948 does not make sense right now. We saw, for instance, the hot button issue of what was decided then by Ben-Gurion to exempt 500 Jewish yeshiva buchers, okay, to not go to the army has turned into a situation of tens of thousands a year. So obviously we're in a different place. And I can tell you also that if you're looking at the religious community, there are a lot of things that are not as important to them today in 2020 that was important to them in 1948.
So it sounds like you're arguing that maybe we should allow businesses to open on the Sabbath.
I'm saying that it's very easy to go ahead and take a specific issue, such as you mentioned, and try to deal with that separately. What I'm saying is that you have a very huge macro issue that deals with a lot of things, whether it's conversion, whether it's kashrut, whether it's public transportation on the Sabbath.
So, and we're gonna break some of those down.
Marriage,
but again, with
divorce.
We're talking about operations.
So
of
when
business.
When it comes to the operation of businesses on the Sabbath, one of the things that my party has gotten behind is the covenant that was made between Gabizon and Meidan. Gabizon is a former Supreme Court justice, of course, and Yaakov Meidan is an esteemed rabbi on the more moderate side of the spectrum within national religious. What they were able to do is find a formula in terms of which businesses would be open, which businesses would not be open. That's a basis in which you can have a dialogue, but you can't just go ahead and decide flat out that you're going to decide that everything is going to be open or everything is going to be closed. It's obviously a lot more complicated.
I'm not necessarily saying to mandate that all businesses stay open or closed, but to give all those private businesses the choice. Mark, what's your take?
Well, again, you've hit an area that we probably agree to a large degree. I'm sort of happy with what Tel Aviv has done, with the exception of the fact that it's closed some of the bodegas or whatever, or AMPMs on certain weeks. They've cut down the number to make the Ministry of Interior happy. But by and large, what Tel Aviv has done is they said certain areas we're going to allow commerce to be. So in the port area, in the Sarona area, in the Rakevet, the old train station area, and in other places we'll only let small supermarkets be open so people can buy their regular needs. I think it's nice to have one day a week when there's a little bit less commerce going on. I think it's not unreasonable. I think it's It gives a certain different flavor to the day, which is nice for everybody to sort of relax a little bit. You don't need to buy everything on the same day. Now, look, we have a separate problem, is the fact that we don't have a day that's really equivalent to the American Sunday. We have like half a day Friday, Sunday is a work day. We need to have at least one day a week when people can not work and be able to do all the things that they want to do, including all the shopping they want to take place. So I think Tel Aviv has found the right balance between having shopping areas open, having small supermarkets. So there's no reason why you should not be able to buy milk or whatever you might need during the course of Saturday. While on the other hand, and of course allowing all of the cafes to be open and movie theaters also, so that people can have entertainment and those sort of things. But you don't really need to buy that electrical appliance in the middle of Saturday afternoon. You can wait for that. And sort of.
So again, that being said, Tel Aviv is kind of a special case because even the mayor of Tel Aviv, the municipality here, has said, while we allow some of these exceptions by turning a blind eye, really, at any point in time, the Interior Ministry could crack down and we would have no choice but to
absolutely.
acquiesce.
Look, but what Tel Aviv has done should be part of the law. That's the way it should be in this country, in my opinion. In other words, Tel Aviv is a good model. Obviously, the Ministry of Interior under Aryeh Deri will never agree to that. But that's a whole other story. Right now, Deri probably does not have a majority in the government to change the law. And that was part of the things that by blue and white being in this coalition, it probably will not happen, what Deri would like to see done. However, this is the right balance, in my opinion, to sort of allow people a place to go shopping and yet not to turn the whole city into a shopping center.
You know, I disagree that Tel Aviv is the model for the entire country. You could make the argument whether Tel Aviv is the model for Tel Aviv, but for sure in Jerusalem, I don't see that working. In a majority of cities, whether it's in the north or the south, I don't see that working. Maybe for some of the sister cities within the Tel Aviv metropolitan
why doesn't that
area.
Work in those cities?
Because again, you have to look at who the population is. I can tell you the arrangement we have in Mevaseret Zion, where the majority of people are secular. Everything is closed on the Sabbath. The reason that everything is closed is because they want a certain quality of life which you get when everything is closed. And yes, there's the option to get into your car and go elsewhere. It's easier when you live in a city like I do that has a higher socioeconomic level. It's a little bit more difficult, let's say, for someone who might be living in Bat Yam who wants to get up to Herzliya or northern Tel Aviv, and I understand that issue. But in a majority of places, and I can tell you as someone who's definitely throughout the last year, I've had a lot of campaign stops throughout the entire country. When it comes to religion and state, we hear this a lot coming up within the Gush Dan area, the Tel Aviv metropolitan area, the entire area also where you see a predominantly secular Ashkenazi population. You go out to the periphery where it's more Sephardi, it's more traditional. Even if they're not religious, this isn't necessarily things that are important to them. You know, if you go up to Nahariya, that's not a cultural center. They're not looking necessarily to go ahead and open up the movie houses. They're okay spending a day without that. In Tel Aviv, you have a different population. It's obviously, you know, beyond a financial, it's a cultural center of the country. And again, you have a certain demographic that lives here that doesn't live in a lot of areas.
All right, well, now you touched on something that I actually want to move on to, which is public transportation in Israel. Now that, of course, has also been a very contentious issue because the lack of weekend public transportation, you know, it hurts, of course, the tourism industry, people coming into the country to travel around, but it also hurts locals who maybe don't have a private vehicle, people of lower socioeconomic status, who are stuck in whatever city that they are, even if they want to travel during their weekly vacation day. And it's actually come back again because several government ministers have advertised themselves on social media, encouraging people to travel and see the country on Saturdays, while much of the public can't do so. And one of these ministers is actually Ayelet Shaked from your Yamina party. You know, what do you make about that? Because she voted against public transportation in the country, yet she's encouraging people to go out and move around in the country on Saturdays.
Well, like I said, I think that when it comes to this issue and all of the issues, what you need to do, and this is what my party called to do a long time ago, is to bring everyone around the table from all segments of society, including the non-Jewish population, and to go ahead and to come to some sort of agreements. it's a problem to just try to expect that on one particular issue you're going to be able to make an agreement when a lot of times in a negotiation you're willing to give on one thing in order to get something else. In terms of the specific issue, look, if you ask the Haredim, and again, I'm not going ahead and saying that is my position, but the Haredi position is that they have a problem paying as taxpayers, that they're putting money in that then goes to the desecration of the Sabbath, which is considered to be one of the highest violations within Judaism. They don't want to go ahead and be part of it. Now, there are creative solutions to get around that. I'm not saying to go ahead and divert specific tax funds to go to one place instead of the other place. But instead of, for instance, buses, there are, of course, for a long time, many years, there was the aspect of the Moniot Shirut, the special shuttles that have been used that do not get government funding. There are ways to do.
Funded.
Yes, there are ways to go ahead and do this in which there's either a public aspect where there could be a reimbursement or subsidy that is taken out of a specific, I guess what you would call coalition monies, which we've seen as a way to go ahead and sort of get out of the original budget. And this is something that, of course, the Haredim have done for their own use. We could see this being used for something as this as well.
Without getting too deep in the weeds, excuse me, I think there needs to be a separate Shabbat transportation network. I don't mean separate from a legal standpoint, but in other words, a plan that says, okay, what do we need to do to allow people to get to the beach on Saturday, to get wherever they want to go on Saturday? Obviously, like everything else in the United States, the train schedule isn't the same on Sunday as it is on Friday or Thursday, whenever it is. So we need to take a look at it and say, okay, these are the sort of routes that we have to run. I mean, the Tel Aviv municipality got together with a bunch of other towns in the region and have created their own bus system for Saturday. And I think something like that needs to be done on a national level because, you know, the bottom line is, yes, if you're wealthy, you have a car, it doesn't make any difference. But if you're not wealthy or you don't have a car for another reason, you're stuck. And so I think it's important to have that potential. Also, you want to visit someone who's in a hospital. How do you do that? I mean, you need special routes, let's say hospitals, let's say on Shabbat. Things of that nature need to be done. It requires thought. And one of the things that we're very bad at in this country is medium-term thought to say, okay, what is the problem? Let's find the ways to solve it, and then we can find the technical things.
How do you address the argument that funding or at least allowing public transportation and business to operate on the Sabbath hurts the employment of the Haredi or the religious sect?
I don't think it hurts the employment. In the United States, it doesn't hurt the employment. There are laws that say you cannot discriminate against people who keep Shabbat.
But realistically, somebody might say, hey, you know, I need somebody who works on Saturday, Sunday, and so I'm not going to hire you.
You could say the same thing realistically in the United States, and they'll get a lawsuit, and they don't do it anymore. I mean, the reality is that's a law in the United States, and it's observed, and there's no reason to think it's not going to happen here in Israel.
There's also a law that says if you do work on the Sabbath, it's extra pay to the employee, meaning the employers do not have an interest to also go ahead and employ so many people during what's supposed to be our rest day. You were talking beforehand, according at least to Israeli law, the Sabbath is supposed to be our rest day. But you were talking about, you know, thinking things out a little bit more and planning them. For instance, if I'm going to go ahead and run the Petach Tikva line to Tel Aviv on Shabbos, you have an issue because it goes through Bnei Brak.
Right.
Okay, there are a lot
ways of getting
things
around that, though.
No, obviously there is, but what are you going to, as a legislator, are you going to go ahead now and define each line, special routes? Like it becomes a very, very complex thing.
Not every city is Bnei Brak.
No, I mean,
not every city is Bnei Brak.
You have a commission with real power, and it sits down and figures it out. I mean, it's work.
No, for sure it's work. But I'm saying, is this something you're going to put to the legislator? Is this something you're going to put to the regulator? For instance, the Transportation Ministry acts as a regulator when it comes to these types of issues. Or are you going to go ahead and you're going to give it to the actual companies that are running it who say, I know better where it is that I want to go through?
Between individual companies and the municipalities, like Mark said,
again,
Tel Aviv has done.
Mark mentioned, you know, instead of the shuttle systems which you have before, what you have now within the Tel Aviv metropolitan area is a new concept in which, again, they're using city taxes as opposed to using national taxes to go ahead and provide services for their citizens. For instance, I can tell you in Mevaseret, we use city taxes to provide service to get to certain bus depots within the area for people who want to take lines up to the north or south of the country. That's not on the Sabbath, that's on regular days, but I'm saying this type of money being used by municipalities when it comes to facilitating.
Voted for by those municipalities.
Yes, and again, if they don't like what's happening, they can vote for a different mayor or a different city council, and those things will go away. When I said creative solutions, it's one of the solutions that's out there. But you'll notice that no one else outside of the Tel Aviv area, who are now, everyone is well aware of this concept and this model, no one else has decided to administer it. And I think there's a reason why we've not seen that.
It has buses on Shabbat, so that's...
Well, that's true. You have that goes back to,
I'm saying, but you
to the
have,
status quo agreement that they were grandfathered
one
in.
of the other three big cities in the country has public transportation, so really it's...
But again, it goes back to, look, I think Ben-Gurion did what he had to do to establish the state. And everyone who says, oh, he should have done things differently or whatever, had he done things differently, and I think in that negotiation with the rabbis, he got the best deal that he could, we would not have a state. So we have to recognize that the situation we're dealing with is based on what happened in 1948. It makes sense in 2020 to get everyone together and see if we can make a new deal. And I'd like to mention the aspect of the Christians and the Muslims in this too, because once you start talking about a lot of these religious courts or marriage or divorce or things like that, we see suddenly the ultra-Orthodox, right, the Haredim, are hand in hand with all of the Arab parties and all of the non-Jewish representatives, because they don't want to see intermarriage, for instance. They don't want to see a situation in which the secular elements within their religion go ahead and make too much headway. It's very interesting, right? You would expect that the minorities would be protesting about these issues, that they can't go where they want to on Saturday. But the truth is that they don't, because they benefit from this situation, and they actually do not want to see a change to this.
Okay, well, I mean, now we're touching some of the more important areas as far as I'm concerned.
Marriage?
Well, marriage, the whole issue of civil courts versus religious courts. I'm in favor of eliminating the religious courts unless someone wants it. You're welcome to go to a religious court if you want, but there should be civil marriage in this country. Civil divorce, which is much more important than civil marriage, which is the biggest problem right now, is you can get a civil marriage in Cyprus, but then if you want to get a divorce, you're stuck with religious courts. And also the whole issue of the burial societies, where you're tied to the ultra-Orthodox burial methods, and the method in terms of they're the ones who are responsible for government burial in the country. These things should all become civil, and it should be civil society that decides.
So that is actually a really big topic, because currently, just for the viewers who don't understand that, there is no civil marriage in Israel, or gay or legal partnership in that sense. What a non-ultra-Orthodox couple would then have to do is travel outside of the country to a nation like Cyprus, where these civil unions are allowed, get a civil union, and then bring that marriage license back to Israel where it can be ratified. So, why not have a civil union? I mean, you mentioned not wanting interfaith marriage, but it's more than that. We're also talking about maybe secular people who would benefit from that.
Yeah, I mean, we have to look at, again, where society is now compared to where it was before. In terms of divorce,
do you think that Yamina would back anything like that, like a civil union?
Look, there's obviously a very big difference between marriage and civil union. There's a very big difference between the official recognition of the state and giving basic rights that are equal to everybody. And if you go back and you look at the record, I think you'll see that a majority of people affiliated with specifically Yamina Chadash, not with our sister party within Yamina, have gone ahead and said things to that regard. But I think, again, you need to understand where things are. You mentioned divorce. There's no international agreements when it comes to divorce, because that's still a very hotly tested issue within the international arena. When it comes to marriage, it's a lot easier. That's why Israel, who signed all these international agreements, goes ahead and recognizes whether you're from Cyprus or other countries coming in with a marriage license. In terms of burial, again, it goes back to the status quo. You can go to a nearby kibbutz, and you can go ahead and get a burial that has nothing to do with the rabbinate. There are things that were grandfathered in. No, that's true, but I'm saying there are a lot of exceptions There are loopholes. Yes, Cyprus is a 45-minute plane flight.
Right now it's
okay.
Now it's 45 minutes in a 2-week quarantine.
Right. No, but I'm saying is that yes, it's 45 minutes, but people who want to go ahead and go to Eilat, that's an even longer trip, by flight. So look, there are solutions, there are creative solutions, and it's working within the system that we have now. So we can change that system, but we need to have dialogue.
So that's
with
actually what I
everybody.
wanted to get to, because how, what would it take to change these systems? What parties would need to be involved, and how likely is that to ever occur?
Very small, because the reality, let me put it this way, we have to solve our right-left issue on the Palestinians before we can deal with religion. Because what's happened here over the last 60, 70 years? The reality is that the ultra-Orthodox have often been the linchpin that has allowed one government or another to come to power, whether it's right or left. They've certainly been, since 1983, the linchpin of the Likud, who's made a deal with them since 1983, and the Degel Torah, or that part of the Haredi Ashkenazi parties, have basically have a marriage with the Likud that goes back to then. And even when the left came to power, they used the Shas one time in order to get to power. And second of all, even when they come to power, they're afraid of breaking with these parties permanently, because if they break with them permanently, there's no chance of ever coming to power again. So as long as those parties are the key to coming to any sort of government, no one is willing to go out and say, no, we're not going to listen to you, we're going to do what most Israelis want. Because 70% of Israelis certainly want significant reform. We can argue where that reform would come to, but 70% of Israelis want significant reform in this issue.
Final comment. I was going to say, I agree with you, and I disagree with you. In 2013 to 15, Bennett and Lapid had a great relationship. There was a government without without Haredi parties. What happened was, though, that collapsed as a result of the fact that Lapid decided he cared more about the Palestinian issue than religion and state issues, which was unfortunate. So that's why I sort of agree with you. I also disagree with you because when it comes down to it, most Israelis do care about these issues. It's true that they vote on security issues, but if the parties decided that they themselves would go ahead and focus on these things, then we could go ahead and see change. And it doesn't. We've had governments without the Haredim. We also had that with Lapid's father, Tommy, back in Sharon. We've had governments like that. But what's happened is that we have a situation where, for whatever reason, the left decides to keep going back to the Palestinian issue instead of doing anything on this.
All right. Well, I know that we could talk about this endlessly. I want to thank Jeremy Saltan and Mark Shulin for coming in again and discussing these hot topics with us. Tune in next time on Insider for more in-depth analysis on everything Israel. Also, if there's a topic that you want us to cover next, please let us know in the comments section online. And finally, remember that for more news from Israel, follow ILTV on Facebook, like us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV channels. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.